Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin from FIDIC CEO. You're welcome to this COVID-19 webinar. This is the 15th in the series, and we've had the opportunity to meet quite a lot of great speakers around the world. Today, I'm delighted that we've got a few more great speakers around the world from Australia, from the United States, from Canada, and also from Netherlands. In addition to that, I've got two of my member staff who will join us, both in terms of policy and communication. Today's subject, we are dealing with coming out of COVID. What does this mean? What does the new norm mean? How are we looking at our industry and how we get there? What are the changes that we need to put in place? I'm delighted to have eminent speakers, to join us today. I'm going to spend these 5 minutes to introduce this subject, and thereafter we'll invite our president. Once again, he's been extremely kind to me to support us once again, to say a few words. Thereafter, I'm going to introduce the panel speaker, who we have between 10 to 15 minutes to try and address the issue before us. And then we move into Q&A session, which will take about 30 minutes. During that period, I'll get both Graham and also Andy, who did a fantastic job deputizing for me while I had a week off last week. I'm delighted, and thank you very much, Andy, for your support. And hopefully, during that period, we also get the opportunity to have our board member, Tony Barry, to share a few words with us. We'll close out on the hour within 1 hour, 30 minutes. So without further ado, I'm just going to kick it into the subject. We've had quite a lot of subject being covered over the months and weeks. We started by looking about the industry, what are the challenges, and how is the industry reacting. We talked about issue about, the impact of force majeure. We looked at issue of joint venture. We covered consultancy contract. We looked at insurance, alternative dispute resolution. We covered digital. What does this mean as we move into the new world? We then look at our people, at soft side of the people. What does it mean? We looked at issue about balance sheet. How do we make sure your business is fit for the future? We talked about communication, which is a theme that keeps coming across in all that we've done. Communication is critical. Then we talked about how do you kickstart. And then over a period of time, we had an opportunity to meet quite a lot of people from the international financial institution. And last time we looked at, private sector investor developers and how they're going to engage. Today, we're looking at coming out of COVID-19. What does this mean for our industry? What is the new norms? What should we be looking at? What is the demand from the industry? How are we going to respond? How is our industry going to be structured in future? And what do we need to do to make sure we have the right finance to come into play? Without further ado, I'm now going to invite our president, Bill Howard, to give us an opening speech. Bill, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nelson. And I'd like to personally thank you and the Secretariat for putting these webinars together. Under any circumstances, it would be a challenge to communicate all around the world via this technique, and it's particularly challenging with a pandemic going on. So my thanks and congratulations to you and the Secretariat staff for putting such quality programs together. I also would like to thank our speakers today. Everyone is involved to a very high degree in their businesses with lots of concerns. They're very, very busy. And on top of that, with a pandemic, many, if not most or all, have family issues they're dealing with as well. So on behalf of the FIDIC board, would like to express our wholehearted thank you to our speakers. And finally, I'd like to thank all those who are attending the session with us remotely. We very much appreciate their tuning in. We've had a pretty good record of attendance, and that tells us, delivers us a message that we appear to be dealing with the right things and adding value, which of course we definitely want to do. We're going to hear a lot today about coming out of COVID, and just a couple of quick remarks I'd like to make before turning it over to the speakers. One of the themes we've been hearing in virtually all of the webinars is the uncertainty of what's going to happen, and I think that's very understandable. The need for scenario kind of based planning and that sort of thing will probably be there, and there'll probably be some surprises Some things that we think are going to happen that may happen in a different way or not at all. But in my view, one thing that's not going to change is the need for us to address the infrastructure needs related to climate change and the UN development goals, particularly those related to sanitation and public health. We had a big problem before these webinars, and we still have the problem. In some ways, maybe the problem will get more acute. But it's something that we need to keep on our minds, as we as professional engineers have an obligation, and certainly we as FIDIC have an obligation to communicate to the world the need to adequately address these. In that connection, when we're finished with the webinars, I'm going to be working with the Secretariat to produce some state-of-the-world communications in a different format than what we've been producing. We'll use social media a lot more, but the main goal there will be to emphasize the need for us to adequately address climate change and related matters. So I wanted to mention that sort of up front, and maybe we'll have a chance to chat about it a little bit later. But with that, turn it back to Nelson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. I mean, what always amazed me is considering the time zone different, you seem to have the knack of beating me to the time, considering that I think United States was about 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock now in the morning, and you are wide awake and fully switched on. So thank you very much, Bill, for your continued support. I mean, wherever you are around the world, we've had about issue about lockdown. We've had about economy border being controlled, shut down. We hear where, you know, businesses completely no go, schools being shut down, industries being shut down. I'm told the statistics that is ahead of everybody at the moment is about how we're going to come out of here. What is the industry going to look like, and what is the shape is the industry going to come across here? And what does the new norm looks like? Are we going to be back to the business as usual? Something tells me it's not going to be the case. Are we going to do more of the same but slightly different? Does that mean the requirement of the industry in terms of the society needs is going to be different? Yes, it will be different. Are we going to have it in the quantum and the size of it? Nobody knows. But one thing that is sure, the way we work, which is absolutely certain, most of my staff have been working from home, most part of the world, people are working from home. The way we work will be impacted. The demand on the resources and infrastructure will change, and how we finance infrastructure will definitely change. Who is going to take a lead? Is there going to be a structural change to our industry? These are the questions that is going through the mind of every practitioner around the world. And I hope this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are, we have the opportunity to listen to the eminent speaker. At this point, I'm delighted to welcome Tony Barry, once again, our Deputy or Vice President, who's been supporting us eloquently again in Australia. He tells me it's their evening time. So, you know, maybe I can have the opportunity for 1 hour of his time before you go for a glass of wine. So, Tony, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Let's have your view.
Thanks, Nelson, and thank you, Bill. And thanks, I echo Bill's words and thanking the Secretariat for these seminars or these webinars. They've been very well done. Thank you. I'd just like to share with you some ideas, really, about how we might come out of COVID-19 and what we can do from a position of leadership in our industry and potentially in our broader societies to help our countries recover and our industry to recover. If you like, there are going to be, in my mind, there are sort of 4 discrete areas one can think about, and we've already talked about a few of them. So we've already, most of our governments, not all, but most governments have put in place what I'll call a health recovery, a health management program of various sorts to try and handle the pandemic. So that's wave 1, if you like. The second thing has been very much focused on supporting people, supporting families, and providing, if you like, the both financial and social support to assist people to get through the pandemic. And we are, you know, everybody who can, as quickly as possible, wants to start talking about economic recovery, because most of the countries have gone through some sort of lockdown, some sort of slowdown, and are in a position where possibly their March quarter, but definitely their June quarter, will see a negative economic growth, and in some cases very substantially. We've seen our share markets down 35%. They've come back up fairly well, to be honest, and it's now a cross between a V-shaped recovery and a U-shaped recovery for those who are interested in that side of life. So, but we're now focused, if you like, on the economic recovery. And the first, the way I see it is, the first thing to do is to understand where we are at, because every country is at a different time in the pandemic cycle. They're at a different place in terms of political leadership. Some, if you like, have consolidated their leadership. Others have, in fact, destabilized their leadership. We're at a different time in terms of our infrastructure development, in terms of our capability. And so everybody is starting from a different position. So it's very wrong of any one of us to sit here and tell you how it's all going to happen. But what we can do is maybe help you to have some influence in your place, in your country, in your industry, to assist your country, your industry, to come out of this crisis in better shape. And that's what I'd like to just share some ideas around that today. We're all going back to work, as it were, in a situation where there will not be a vaccine for some time, and we don't know how long that's going to be. So there's no doubt that there will be changed working arrangements. All of our industries, wherever possible, people will still be working from home in 6 months' time, in 9 months' time, and possibly longer. And many of our offices, we can't have the same number of people in them. As you probably know, if you ever done any lift analysis or traffic analysis for lifts, you'll know that it'll take about 5 hours to get everybody up in the lift in a building, in the lifts in a building, if they only go 2 at a time. So we just can't have everybody in the office. It's not going to work. And so we can't maintain social distancing. So we're going to have a lot of people, wherever possible, working from home. And that's going to continue pressure on our IT infrastructure in our companies, also going to keep pressure on our broadband networks and other telecommunications networks in our countries. So in some cases, I know in the Australian case, we invested 48 billion over 5 years in a national broadband network, which is pretty fast and has proved to be really quite reliable given the pressure put on it in these last number of months. But I do see there'll be, in many countries, opportunities to reconsider where they put their infrastructure dollar. And some of that, I've got no doubt, will end up going towards short-term measures to enable our telecommunication systems to operate more effectively. At the same time, we are going to be in a position where the firms in our industry are in different situations depending on their market. So those of us who operate very heavily in the government infrastructure area probably have longer term contracts. We have a client who will pay in most cases. We're in a position where our forward workload and our pipeline is relatively secure. And certainly I have noticed that in Australia, that the big firms with the big government contracts, they're ploughing on, albeit under different conditions. But the smaller firms are struggling. There's no doubt that there's quite a lot of the smaller firms that were dependent on private investment, on property development and so forth. They have struggled. And I think that's going to continue for some time. So it's important as a piece of work, number one, to understand where your country's at, what your capability is. Secondly, to understand where your industry is today. And then it's important to understand what your government might want to do about your economic recovery. And I think most governments around the world, as I've said, will want to get people back to work, but they will want to get more people in jobs, because a lot of jobs have gone missing in this last number of months and possibly won't come back for some time, if at all. So in many countries, we're looking at high levels of unemployment throughout the shutdowns and beyond. So it's very important, if you're going to approach government, to be looking at areas where you can advise them and provide them advice that's going to lead to the generation of projects and jobs for people. And getting people into employment, getting them earning a wage, gives them capacity to spend. And then once they've got the capacity to spend, the economic recovery will come. So to me, very important that in our thinking, we recognise that there are multiple waves here. A big spend, for example, on major infrastructure would take some time to get going and would to create momentum. So focusing on that might not be in your government's interest. It might be more in your government's interest to look at housing projects where you can get those up relatively quickly compared to the very big urban infrastructure projects, to look at projects which are smaller, such as municipal roads and these sorts of small bridges, but look to generate a lot of work in small things that can happen quickly. And that'll enable both our industry, but also potentially people from other industries to come and work in this space and generate more jobs. So to me, that aligning, if you like, what I'll call the political imperative with the industry imperative is very important in policy terms. It's very important for our mutual success. I would also go to the fact that this is not a financial crisis. Some of us who invest in shares and so forth might think it is, but it isn't. The money, there is still plenty of money available in the economies around the world, and particularly those countries that manage very large retirement funds. They certainly have capacity. So again, the idea that funding is an issue can be overcome, and it does need some governance and some structure. And so, we may see new financial instruments. We may see the old infrastructure bonds come back. We may see new forms of collaborative contracting, which involve financiers, to try and get these projects up more quickly so that we can get, or build, if you like, back to pre-COVID-19 levels. But it is important that we enter those discussions with government and that we really focus on what is good for government and what is good for our industry at the same time. We also are in a position where we're all in business, and the reality is business has hurt along with the individuals. So there are many, many support mechanisms that have been put in place, certainly in Australia, for business. And there's a very long list of those, which I'm happy to share with people, but involving things like tax relief, cash support, employment, payroll support. There's all sorts of measures that have been put in place to get us through a period which was estimated to last about 6 months. But also beyond that, it's going to be important to continue to support business in terms of the new infrastructure business is going to have to put in place to enable it to get back to the same levels of productivity we had pre-COVID. And it may well be we go past those levels of productivity if this infrastructure is put in place. So I do think there are a number of policy areas where we've really got to start talking to government so that we can, number one, get the infrastructure pipeline in the medium term built into a good place, that we put in place short-term initiatives to enable us to get smaller projects in place to create jobs. And then I think the third thing is to look at is the support for business itself and how we can make sure that many of the players in our industry continue to be successful. I've probably said enough there. Nobody's waving their arms yet, but that's possible. But I would also say to you that if you're not already in it, I would think those countries that have what I'll call a fairly weak telecommunications system, weak telecommunications infrastructure, will look to ramp that up significantly. And I do see that as a business opportunity. I know it has been here in Australia over many years, and I think it will only continue. So I do encourage you to look for those opportunities. They are there, and they are going to take work, if you like, to get them off the ground. But I'm sure you can all take the role of being a significant influencer in your country and see whether you can promote some of the opportunities that are in the mutual interests of the government, the society, and our industry. Thank you, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Tony, for that sort of what I call helicopter view. And actually, that's highly welcome because that set the scene in terms of the direction we're looking at. I think you've looked at a macro point of view. Yes, government is looking at the health of people, is looking at supporting family, the economy, and now we are moving into how do we get the economy kick-started. You are absolutely right. There is no shortage of money in the industry. It's about how do we package it, and the need for industry to work with government to make sure that we balance the political and economic alignment is very critical. So thank you very much, Tony. I'm now going to move on and invite our second speaker, which is Karin Sluis from Witteveen+Bos from Netherlands. Karin is somebody that I've known very well. We've worked together before, and he's going to give us her perspective on what is happening in Netherlands, and maybe with a little bit of help, give us an insight to what is happening in some of the other European countries. Karin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. I'd like to share a few things we see in the Netherlands particularly, and I think they're also true for other European countries. And I think the headline would be the EU wants to set the example. And what we see is three topics that are coloring this example. And the first is we want to get digital. And that means that there's much focus on digital engineering, on data-driven working. And the idea behind that is to create a higher productivity, less failure costs, higher speed of delivery at a cheaper price. But we also see developments in digital business operations, not only within companies, but in the complete sector, together with, for example, public authorities. And we see a very fast increase in digital cooperation worldwide. I'm convinced it will be partly from home forever, because it also has value to work from home in terms of a work-life balance, for example. We have in our company, we have a sick leave that has never been this low. It's incredible, and it's even getting lower each day. So the EU wants to set the example in terms of getting digital. That's one. Then the second thing is the EU wants to set the example in terms of sustainability. And the past few weeks, we see an increasing interest again in things as the circular economy, and part of it is the energy transition. And also, I've seen a very interesting graph which shows a small city that is suffering of a small wave called COVID, a bigger wave called the recession, and a large wave called climate change. So the interest in climate change is also picking up speed again. And also the relationship between climate change and biodiversity is getting more and more emphasis. So those are all, topics in this sustainability item. So getting digital, getting more sustainable, that's also a topic on which the EU wants to set the example, and that includes the biodiversity. And then third, I think the EU wants to set the example, and the Netherlands in specific, is on diversity and inclusion. I think the leaving no one behind and bridging the gap between the haves and have-nots is getting more and more emphasis the past few weeks. And also the value of that is, for example, increasing flexibility, using everybody's knowledge in a future that demands more agility than ever. And also, what I see is that companies are urged to take more responsibility on this topic as well. And companies are urged to take more initiative for sustainable solutions, including this diversity and also financial sustainability. So the EU wants to set the example in terms of digital sustainability and diversity and inclusion. And what does that mean for our industry? I think a few things. I think we cannot underestimate the digital transition that we need to accelerate. And we should, as consulting engineers, should take the initiative to make this digital transition also a valuable transition together with partners, because it's not a transition as such, but it needs to create value. So we need to add our knowledge to this transition. And second, I think we should develop as an industry new design principles, flexible design, circular designs, building with nature, but also social designs and participatory design as in terms of designing together with all the stakeholders. And that's something we can really do a step forward on. And then third, I think we should overall take another role as companies with more responsibility and more initiative. We should engineer the future and creating more value for less money. I also fully agree with Tony. We should create jobs. We should create cheaper housing. And I think that will be in a setting with less traditional procurement by governments. And I think governments should even can be disrupted by our companies, and more hybrid collaboration between financiers, financials, investors, communities, NGOs, science, because we need a lot of new knowledge. Contractors, engineering consultants, as we are, can create these teams, and I think we should not only create a future in terms of the sustainable solutions, but also we should the ones that create the teams that can create the sustainable future. And I would like to end up with a personal observation, starting within the Netherlands on day 2 of the COVID crisis, that there hasn't been more collaboration also between consulting engineers than we have seen the past years. It has been a major shift. Consulting engineers are sharing ideas, sharing all information, for example, in terms of sick leave or whatsoever. And I think it's not longer we against them, but we're in this together. And as long as we create value, we're in business. Thank you, Nelson.
Karin, thank you very much. I like the 3 big issues by EU. That seems to put it into context. Digital, sustainability, and D&I. And it's interesting, I suspect, when you take those 3 drivers out, we can see what a lot of things that we can do in our industry. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll come back to you, Karin, on this subject, because you're excited by the idea of digital transition. We need to take a new role. So I'm really keen about that. But before we get into the Q&A, I'm going to actually invite Karin, to give us her own view. She's the Chief Operating Officer, Morrison Healthcare in Canada. Karin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. I'm very pleased to be here, and I think that already we've heard a very broad view of what post-COVID is going to be like, the new normal. So I'll just try and add to that from mostly a Canadian perspective. I am the COO of a diversified consulting engineering firm, and we have 23 offices in Canada and the US, one in India. We're about a 1,200 person firm, and we're employee owned. And I'd have to say that FIDIC and ACEC and our US member association has really supported us in this time. And we have been going to ACEC and FIDIC for guidance and information, what other consulting engineering firms. So I applaud FIDIC for their leadership in this time. Before COVID, our firm already had a very robust technology and we were able to work from home. In fact, 20% of our staff did work from home, mostly for work-life balance reasons, and we encouraged that for retention. When COVID struck, we were able within a week to virtually have our entire firm working remotely. We do have about a couple hundred people that worked on field and construction, and the remaining 1,000 in their new home offices. I think actually in North America, we were trending towards an environment where our home really became very self-sufficient. So it wasn't that difficult a transition. Now, what does the post-COVID new normal look like? I'm trying with my firm to have a balance between hope and what I think is the likely reality. And I agree that the future is going to include COVID. Once we open the borders, I assume that we will be still working in an environment with COVID. The threat of it will still be with us. And the unknowns, and as mentioned already, really is nothing like we've seen in our professional lives. Until we have a vaccine or effective medical treatment, we are going to have to live with this threat. So consequently, we really do have to be resilient as a firm, agile, depending on what transpires. There's still a possibility of future waves of higher rates of infection. So I agree with the other speakers so far that the new normal is going to be a hybrid world, really from those working from home, some perhaps working in a physical work environment, others working all the time at home, perhaps a combination of working at home and going into the office for team meetings or to touch base. I think our firm, we were hesitant to really fully encourage working at home because of the team requirement in our work and the technical oversight and mentoring that's needed. But what we found is actually we're quite effective and productive at home. And we've learned a lot about working remotely in the last couple of months. In fact, the current surveys in North America show that 70% of people want to continue to work at home, which is a huge number. And the reason for that varies. Karin mentioned the work-life balance. That's one aspect of it. Obviously, some are frightened of actually contracting the disease, but also we've heard that the saving in commute time has really allowed people to spend more time either working, well, that's what our staff have told us, or time with their family. So I think there are some potential considerations that I have been thinking about for our firm, and I think it is applicable to others. First of all, we have to continue to really worry about the health and safety of our staff. And so that means that we're going to have to maintain the social and physical distancing. New office space requirements. In fact, I had a meeting yesterday where we have hired a consultant to go over the changes to our office space and trying to come up with a policy that we can apply to our 23 offices. That'll include more square footage for people and lesser people in the office. And of course, how do you disinfect the office. So that is a huge concern. We're going to have to continue to provide personal protective equipment for all our staff in the construction site. Canada has had declared engineering an essential service. So in my firm, all our construction work on the main part went ahead. There were some of our projects, especially in California, in Washington and Seattle, where they had the initial outbreak, where construction was stopped for a while, but it's back on. So personal protective equipment has been huge, and training and educating our staff on how to use it, how to stay safe. And I think that that's going to continue. We're also worried about traveling, you know, in air travel. We've had staff that expected to get on planes where there'd be physical distancing and found themselves sitting in a plane full. So again, you know, we're going to have to balance safety, but also productivity. The second thing I think is very important is employee communication, the employee experience, and maintaining the company culture when you're doing a lot of it remotely. And we've had to communicate very frequently, much more than we did pre-COVID. And I think that the expectation is set now, and companies are going to have to continue post-COVID to communicate with staff, especially if they're working remotely. It's going to become even more important. The employee experience is going to have to be replicated in more of a digital way. And I'm sure your workplaces, if you've had stay at home, we've enjoyed, you know, a lot of virtual get-togethers and cocktail hours. And in fact, we surveyed our staff just to find out how they're doing. And actually we found that communication, we had a very high number, it was about 80% said that they feel that they're communicating very well with their team members. Actually our entire survey was incredibly positive. So people have already adapted. We've talked about here the importance of technology. Obviously that is a huge one. Companies are going to have state-of-the-art technology to ensure that, you know, that firms are productive, that we're communicating, and that we can work in a way that is so seamless. We can provide the technical oversight that's going to be required. That's one area that I'm worried about and focus on. You know, normally we have startup meetings, senior engineers working with juniors. You know, a lot of review has to take place. And how do you do this when you can't just walk over to someone's desk? So that I think is going to be important. And so new processes will have to be developed to ensure that this is being done. And of course, the cybersecurity, system resiliency with people working remotely, you know, obviously they're more prone to cyber attacks. A third consideration is sort of client interaction and the contracts that we've seen. Some of the clients that we've had have been tremendous in terms of partnering with us, dealing with the problems together, sharing concerns, and even issuing letters to us saying, we understand this is difficult for you and we want to work with you. Other clients, and thankfully there are few of them, have actually been the opposite. They're trying to transfer the risk of COVID onto consulting engineers. We've seen contracts that include a force majeure clause and then say, except for COVID. So I think as an industry post-COVID, you know, and we're going to be leaning on FIDIC, I'm sure, to, you know, ensure that the contracts and the environment is not adding additional risk to consultants, which we already have, the risk transfer already is unacceptable. We have to be careful that we don't have more of that. Another thing we've done is we've already trained staff on how to deal with issues coming up on projects with the force majeure clause being invoked. and it's very complicated. So we've tried to give them some guidance on what they can deal with themselves, what should be escalated within the firm. And in fact, you know, we already have been reaching out for legal support to ensure that we don't put our clients in a difficult situation. And then of course, there's the business consideration. You know, how do we, you know, build resiliency into our firms? And I think this is an important one because we have to balance profit with cash, you know, having enough cash. We've seen in the last few months that cash was very, very important. And so I think that, you know, we don't really know what's ahead, as the other panelists have said. So scenario planning, and that was mentioned, I think is very important. In our firm, we've been doing scenario planning, and we actually are meeting multiple times a week as a senior management team. And then we go through, I would say once every few weeks, we look at our scenarios, we update them depending on what we think is happening. And we're looking quite far ahead to make sure that we have the cash that we need. And so you know, you have to stay in business, and we really don't know what's ahead. In terms of infrastructure spending and how the government has been supporting consulting engineering, again, ACEC in Canada has done a great job of representing consulting engineering and getting the government to understand where we are at. But the Canadian government had already earmarked billions of dollars for infrastructure in Canada. So they haven't really increased that. They already had just in Ontario, one of our provinces where I live, they had $28 billion just for transit over the next few years. So how the majority of Canada's government spending is been focused on supporting small business. In fact, our firm has not been able to take advantage of one business government program. They've really focused on supporting small business and supporting individuals that are out of work. And so this actually is a good thing because it keeps the economy going. They're trying to save the businesses. So when things open up, people have businesses still to carry on. And they've had a lot of funding to keep staff, support staff, payroll for smaller companies. And then of course, a lot of individual unemployment insurance, you know, no questions asked, directly into your bank account. So that's good because that will help keep the economy rolling. The government has really, I think what we've been encouraging them is not to spend the infrastructure money that's been earmarked all at once. You end up taxing the consulting engineering firms, and it's much better to spread it out and regulate it. Now that said, different areas in our country have different problems. One of our provinces, Alberta, which is heavily relies on oil and gas, the economy is very poor there. So that province has actually injected quite a few $1 billion into the economy right now. But Canada also has we've been doing public-private partnership projects, P3 projects, for over a decade, hundreds and hundreds of projects. I think that is going to continue to be very important as the governments maybe run out of the money that they'd like to have spent on infrastructure because they've had to support a small business and individuals. P3 projects and public-private partnership projects may have a resurgence. Actually, they have been, in the last while in Canada, have a bit of a bad reputation because the owners are trying to transfer too much risk, not only to the consulting engineers, but to the contractors. A lot of contractors have said they will not work on P3 projects in Canada. A lot of engineering firms have said that. So that already there has been outreach to our industry as to how we can improve the situation, balance the risk transfers so that P3 projects are more attractive to contractors and to consulting engineering firms. So I think in Canada, because the government really kept consulting engineering and construction projects as an essential business, we have been able to, survive. The consulting engineering firms that I'm in touch with have been doing well. Our particular firm has some federal government projects, but the majority of our projects are private. In fact, our entire US business is based on private industry. And so that is a concern for us. Will they keep having the money to, work on buildings? We do a lot of new construction, rehabilitation of buildings. Are they going to have money for that? Luckily, one of our big areas of practice in the United States is mission critical facilities and telecommunications. And as we've said, in this digital world, I think that's going to be increasingly important. So I worry more about our private clients than I do our federal and municipal provincial clients. So thank you for the opportunity to share what I'm experiencing in our firm and in Canada.
Thank you very much, Karin, for that insightful means of looking through the Canadian perspective and also giving us an idea of what is happening in different parts of the world. I mean, Andy, you've been involved with a lot of conversation on the subject, and I want to thank you again for stepping in for me last time. And I know this subject is very much at top of your view. From communication point of view, we've heard about, a change in the demand from the industry. The way the process that we're going to deliver our industry is going to change. We also talk about there may be more 3Ps or PPP. And I also hear Tony say there is no shortage of money. And also Karin say, the European government are putting funding, but they've got 3 drivers they want to put it in there. Andy, from communication point of view, what do you think we should be focusing on in terms of the message to the industry? Andy, the floor is just for 5 minutes. Andy.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting actually listening to all of the speakers, because all of them in their own way talked about the need for the industry, for our industry, for infrastructure and construction, to be involved in the debate about what happens going forward. It's interesting actually, I just looked at an article this morning from Cardiff City Council in the UK, and they were reporting how they were working with Arup, who are obviously a leading consultancy engineering firm, and how they were working with Arup to help Cardiff reopen its city after COVID. And I think that shows how close our industry is to working with local governments, working with national governments, to actually basically get into this new normal after what we've seen with this with this crisis. And I think so the industry needs to be needs to promote the role that it's actually playing in actually getting the world back on its feet. And I think it's really important that we actually do that we shouldn't in any way be shy of engaging governments at the highest level about what needs to be done, because I'm sure that in many of the countries around the world, and I'm not necessarily going to name them, there would have been discussions about how governments reacted to the crisis, even how the governments are coming out of the crisis at the moment. And it's clear that even national governments don't have all the answers. And I think our industry can play a very important role in actually communicating what it is that we can do and intervening in that vital discussion about what the world of work is going to look like going forward, about what society is actually going to look like, and what the economy is going to look like going forward as well. So I think that's really important. I think there are going to be some significant changes, to how business works going forward. And I think Karin just outlined that she thought that we were going to be with COVID for quite some time, for the foreseeable future. And I think those concerns of the general population about traveling, about social distancing, about just experiencing the new normal, they're going to have an effect on how societies actually work going forward as well. And we know that infrastructure is so vital to how people experience their society. So I think we really need to be involved in that debate. It's not an optional extra at the end of the day. I think our industry is absolutely crucial to making sure that governments actually get that right. I think on the financial side, it's really interesting. In the UK, for example, where I think, you know, PFI in terms of a concept has actually, you know, got a bit of a bad reputation in the UK. The government, although it probably won't call it PFI, it's inevitable that something like PFI will move back onto the agenda, because certainly within the UK situation, I don't think the government are going to want to keep spending public money to the extent that it has been spending it in the recent period. So therefore, private finance will have to play a role going forward, a key role probably. But what projects are actually going to be on the agenda going forward? And I think there's been a lot of talk about sustainability, for example. This is a real chance to embed the UN's Sustainable Development Goals in what happens going forward. I think there is an opportunity to do that, but I don't think it's inevitable, because as governments are looking to create jobs in that dash for growth, will they be bothered, or as bothered as they should be, about sustainable projects? And I think it's up to this industry to make sure that it actually is, because we know that greener infrastructure is better infrastructure, and it's more sustainable. And also, I think there's a big issue there as well that we can actually play to the industry's advantage, and that is, how do we recruit new people into the industry? And if we're becoming more digital, if we're becoming more sustainable, if we're becoming more green, then we then look to be much more of a cutting-edge industry, which we all know we are, but we need to get that across to the younger people out there to say, look, come and join this industry and change the world, because at the end of the day, isn't that what we're talking about?
Thank you very much, Andy. I said 5 minutes, you keep it to 5 minutes. I'm going to bring Graham now, Mr. Statistician. I'm not sure what is the current headline on the statistic there, but I want to keep it 5 minutes brief, because we've got 5 minutes. I want to open Q&A. So Graham, what's the headline on the statistical issue? What is the new norm going to be in your mind? And what are the challenges that goes with the new norm in terms of our industry, our processes, and how we're going to finance issue? I've got 5 minutes. Graham.
Thank you, Nelson. So the new normal at the moment, if you look at the World Economic Forum's recent risk survey, has shifted from people being concerned about the environment and climate towards the economic situation. That's not unusual. It happened in the last financial crisis. Economic concerns obviously go up. In terms of the main ones, it's a prolonged recession, and it is effectively the prospect of SMEs or entire industries suffering, which going forward may actually distribute the burden of how people address COVID slightly differently. Going into this new normal out of that, it is quite interesting that one of the concerns is on international travel, but there is also research starting to come out on the effect of the various lockdown measures on the economy and what different parts of them do. So, for example, stay at home impacts it very significantly, as does workplace closures. But when you look at things like public events and restrictions on transport, they don't have as much of an impact as you would previously think. Some of this has been done in rather creative ways, using carbon dioxide and nitrogen emissions to judge economic growth of them, which is quite innovative, but it's starting to happen. If we look at technology, the new working from home is shifting towards being more flexible. The only thing that seems to be coming out of that at the moment is, despite IT budgets having shifted towards cloud-based systems, actual IT spending by companies on average is down. So we're actually spending less on IT, even though we need IT. The rollout of 5G has generally slowed, and those are the type of technologies that will enable this new working normal. So in the next few years, you're likely to see a jump back of those. Taking that into consideration, if you look at people who have been working from home, the main thing that they miss is collaboration and communication and loneliness, which is quite interesting in what's been said by the other speakers about addressing the mental health of people and making sure that we can adapt to this new normal, if you like. Going forward, technology will help some things, but I don't think it's going to resolve everything. And someone mentioned PFI. PFI is an interesting one for investment in the industry. Investment portfolios are going to change in this new normal. Company dividends have certainly disappeared to a large extent for the moment. And so that does guide a lot of investment. And if you look at PFI in particular, you're seeing a shift in policy talk about government being far more involved in the procurement stages of it. So they have more control in the outcome. Now that's quite interesting for this industry because it means that effective engagement with government can help to drive the money and the funds towards the type of projects which ensure the sustainability agenda remains and that we consider the long-term effects. The then question will be how we deal with who's going to pay for this and over what period. I suspect you're going to see bond rates go out a lot further than they've traditionally done. I mean, I think the UK already has issued some 100-year bonds in the past. So I could see that happening more so you don't burden one generation. And on that note, the new working going forward, there is a concerning trend of youth unemployment going up quite significantly. And so that's a new normal that the industry may have to face again so we don't end up with a skills gap of, if you like, the next 5 to 10 years where the wheels fell off the bus. So at the moment, that's the emerging trends we're seeing. And I tried not to put too many numbers in it.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you. I mean, I think actually that puts a whole lot into perspective. Catherine, I'm fascinated by some of the statistics you quote, so I'm going to start with you. 70% of the people you survey said they prefer to work from home. We've just gone through a period of where mental health, mental well-being of people, and I hear more people want to work from home. If this is going to be the new normal, how do we deal with the mental well-being of people and the issue of not being able to collaborate or be in office where they feel and touch people? This is a major challenge, and how do you think our industry should respond to that, Catherine?
That's a very, very good question, and one that has been top of mind for us. We have been reaching out to our staff, with programs on how to stay fit, how to keep a positive attitude. We've had different speakers. We of course have a company that a benefit that people can call for assistance. But we have been thinking about that a lot, and mostly we're doing it by reaching out, providing expert advice on this. We've made sure that our managers are talking to their staff. So we found, surprisingly, on our recent survey that almost 80% thought they were communicating well. I think the long-term future, though, is, I said people who want to work at home may have an environment that is more supportive, family members around. The other 30% may be those that really will not fare well at working at home. And so we have to make room for them in the physical space so that they can come into the office. In fact, even though our offices have been closed down, we have had some people working in the office nonstop because they live alone, and because there's no one there, they really haven't had any risk of contracting the disease. So I think that those that need to work in an office, we probably can supply that for them, and those that feel supported at home and prefer to work at home can do so.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor out. I think Barbara has already been asking the participant to throw a question at us, but I've got a few questions that I just want to unpack. Some of the interesting message has already been said. So please, if you're a participant, you want to put question, put it in the chat room. I will look at it and I will pick the relevant one. If I can go back into Karin, I love the idea that, you know, the EU wants everybody to go digital. I don't think it's only EU. I think the world needs to go digital. I hear the world needs to go digital. I mean, we've talked about going digital. Oh my God, you know, the world of Zoom and Teams and everybody working together. I mean, I've heard the word digital twin. I'm happily involved with a project of 18 billion where they build a digital twin before they start construction. I won't go into detail. And we had to lay down nearly 7,000 people not working from site. But yet, you know, there are parts of that work that needs to be done. And guess what? Virtually all of them are working from home to deal with things they need to deal with. Are we ready for digital war? Are we going to lead it? Are we going to partner with it? Or who's going to take the role? Is it the client that's going to drive the idea of digital war? Or should we, as an industry, see this is the new generation that we need to take? Do we need to wait for EU to drive it? Karin, what's your view?
Well, I fully agree that it's not a typical EU topic, but I see it in the EU, so that's why I mentioned it. Chewing on your question, what should be our role and whether we should take the lead, I think the crucial advantage we have is not maybe our knowledge of all digital technologies. There might be parties that have that are ahead of us in that field, but our advantage is that we know how to use it in the societal challenges we are working on. So I think what our role should be is that we should think about how digital technologies can help us to solve societal challenges that are in our field faster, better, cheaper, and it's the combination with our engineering knowledge that makes the difference. So I think we shouldn't see it as a match, but we should see it as a challenge to all of us. So what we are working on now in the Netherlands is the NL Ingenieurs, which is the branch organization of consulting engineers in the Netherlands, is organizing this, is a digital platform for all of us working in our industry, but also the public authorities and the contractors, to enhance this digital transition. So I think the mindset should be working together to solve societal challenges and not seeing it as a match. I think that maybe this mindset is the most difficult part, because we tend to see it as a match where one wins and one loses, but we shouldn't see it as a match, I think.
So thanks very much for that, Karin. That explanation. That I didn't mean to pick on EU. I'm just citing the example that the EU understand the world digital is very critical. I suspect if you go to North America, it's the same. If you go to different parts of the world, the same. China is the same. The big issue for me is very much how do we get together to make sure we are part of that conversation, that we are not lagging in that process. And that is very, very important. Again, you talked about collaboration that is happening within other consulting engineers, which I think is fascinating, because sometimes when you find yourself in a difficult position, you start to share information about staff performance issues, holiday, sick leave, and that helps on the operational side. But actually, in terms of delivering the solution for the industry, we are not as good as we could be. Yes, we do some joint venture, but actually I've been in a position where companies come up with a very good technology solution and they keep it to themselves rather than saying, hey, how do we take this to the industry? How do we make it an industry standard? And one of the points that I hear Catherine said earlier on, which I actually enjoyed, is about now because of COVID-19, the word's force majeure is being raised, and clients, some of them are very good, and some of them are passing the buck and actually saying, you consulting engineer now have to carry this. So I'm going to throw a question at Tony. In the sense
Nelson,
that, yes.
Nelson, this is the first time I've done this, so I apologize. I'd like to jump in on the digitalization just for a moment.
Please, yes, please.
We
Okay,
move
fine.
on.
Mr. President, it's your prerogative. Please jump in.
Oh, gee, no. But when I applaud everyone that's talking about this, because I think you hit the magic buttons. The quality perhaps goes up. We can do things faster and we can do things cheaper. There's a direct connection to that with many initiatives going on all around the world, including the American Society of Civil Engineers. The goal of reducing the cost, the life cycle cost of infrastructure by orders of magnitude, 40 or 50%. I think there's an opportunity for us as a profession to start to communicate even more how, as we master these tools, we can actually move in that direction aggressively. I apologize, Nelson, for jumping in the middle of this, but
No, Bill,
really,
please do so more often, make it more interactive. It shouldn't be static. It shouldn't just be me talking. So please, if you need to jump in. I welcome that very much. But going back to the point you raised, you are right, Bill, that in the sense that, there's an opportunity for us to reduce the cost of production, and the traditional, or what I call it, the analog way of developing solution need to move into digital world. I do agree with that. If I can come back to the point I was trying to raise earlier on, Tony, I do hear Catherine talking about some clients are passing the buck. And we need to be sure that our industry are well trained and people on the front line are very, very up to speed. Now, I heard you in the past where we dealt with the issue about force majeure, and FIDIC has produced a guide which is available there for all those who are listening. If you haven't get it, please go to the FIDIC website to get it. How do we ensure, Tony, because I know you've talked about this in the past, that the insurance market is not an easy market, it's going to be hard. How do we ensure that our industry is ready and understand and how to manage this risk, particularly with COVID in mind? Tony, thank you.
Thanks, Nelson. I think there are a couple of things I'd comment. The first one, we haven't quite done this, but I do think a number of governments around the world have already started issuing both procurement and contract management guides to their authorities. And some of those have contained some very, what I'll call healthy statements about working through things together, and have provided specific authority to their agencies to vary contract terms to enable firms to get through the crisis without being harmed too severely. So I think there is room, whether it's a FIDIC publication or something else, I'm not sure, but there's certainly room for us to provide some guidance to clients on what is expected of clients in this circumstance. Whether one wants to have a fight about whether something is force majeure or not is one thing, but actually wanting to work out how we can both get through this problem in the best interests of the project under contract or under design should be the outcome we're seeking. And that is going to require all parties to work together to get a better outcome. So there is room, I think, there for guidance to be provided. I also think there's proactivity is the answer, because if you, and I'll use a very simple example which has got nothing to do with engineering, but if you have a lease on an apartment, you're renting an apartment and suddenly you lose your job and you can't pay, the landlord on one hand is disadvantaged. So what does he do? Does he put you in the street? And the answer is, in a COVID-19 situation, that's probably not the best thing you could do. So maybe the better answer is to come to a compromise and work out how you're going to get through this thing together and enable both the tenant to stay, the landlord maybe bears some short-term pain, the tenant provides some contribution, and it's coming to a negotiated outcome where we're sharing the burden. Because COVID-19 is not your fault, it's not my fault, it is a shared burden. And the idea that clients and contractors and consultants recognize that's what it is, and it's not one party's risk. I think the quicker that happens and the more negotiation that goes on, the better off we're going to be. Don't know whether that does your question.
Well, it does in a way. I expected that
well.
it does. Thank you very much, Tony. I'm going to move swiftly to the next question. Again, I've got a list of questions. I'm sure you are aware that I was going to ask, but actually what's been presented has given me a lot of material. So I'm just going to build on this. And for those who are putting questions in 2-3 minutes, I'll come to you. Andy, thank you very much for addressing some of the questions being put on the floor. The question and the point that was raised by Karin, which is very fascinating, and this is actually quite important. You talk about sustainability and you talk about D&I, and in your resolution you say we have a golden opportunity to engineer the future. I'm playing it back at you. We have a golden opportunity. Now, we've heard about the issue about first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, and then the IT and the internet was meant to take us into fourth industrial revolution. In fact, somebody, I think it was Karin, who said it, that COVID-19 is going to live with us for a long, long time, and we need to change the way we work. Do you truly have opportunity for us to engineer the future, which I think we can? If we are going to do that, what should be the message from our point to the industry on how we need to collaborate? How we need to look at research and development? How do we need to work with institutions to make sure creativity and innovation become an embedded part of our society? Karin, your take on it. You gave me the lead.
Yeah, I think there's a few sort of signaling words that come to my mind, and I would like to share with you. I think the first, and that might be no surprise, it has been mentioned, is collaboration. You can't do this alone because nobody knows the answers. And the answer of today will not be okay tomorrow. So the answers need to be developed day after day. And collaboration is not only between consulting engineering firms, it's in the whole sector. It's also with, I think, artists, of course, scientists. I think, if we want to engineer the future, we need to leave nobody behind and be aggressively searching for new points of view from unexpected people and parties. So that's the first word, collaboration. And artists are really interesting because they always think about the unimaginable. So that's a group of people. We are we have our yearly Art and Technology Prize for nearly 20 years now. And those artists, they supply us with ideas that we've never been thinking of as engineers. So collaboration is one.
Yeah.
And then I think second is maybe the word that is about embracing the unknown, because we are tending to, as engineers, we want to fix a problem. But I think for us, what we need to do to engineer the future is to embrace the unknown and not saying that this solution will be there forever. And that asks from us another mindset, loving to not know and face new situations. And I think those two things are maybe, crucial to engineer the future.
Absolutely, they're good food for thought. I like the using the analogy of the artists collaborating to form new song, new idea that we live with, and that's brilliant. And the other one you talk about embracing the unknown, which is we should not be shy to go into uncharted territory, prepare to experiment, innovate. Now, question from the floor.
Reimagine the future.
Absolutely, reimagine it. Thank you very much, Tony, for giving me that word. But I do like that. So, Karin, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to go to the floor now. There's a few questions. Some of the questions, Andy and others have been able to answer them. But there's a particular question which I want to put to the floor. And this is from a gentleman called Francis Adetola. It's a question to the panelists. It's a, can the panel advise on how can the developing world become participant in the new norm with lack of fund and finances and lack of digital infrastructure? That is a very heavily loaded. You know, we talked about sustainability. I hear the word diversity and inclusion. I hear the word that, you know, if we are going to come out of this COVID, where one part of the society is not left behind, the other side of the society must help. I think this question is actually quite pertinent. Say, when you don't have all this facility, how do you make sure we do that? You know, who feel bold enough to take that? Tony?
I'll tell you a story that a friend of mine in a well-known Asian country once told me, and he was talking to a person who was British, and he said, "You Brits took 400 years to become civilized, and you expect us to do it in 30. The reality is it's a very difficult thing to bring the culture of leadership and governance to a place which enables investment to be made with confidence. And the place to start is leadership and governance. And if you can frame and develop those two things in a good way, then investment will come. There's a lot of money in the world looking for a place to earn a return. There's a lot of money in the world that is available through both philanthropic means and low interest financing. But without the governance and without the leadership, there's no confidence to put that money into those places. And I think that is a very big ask. I'm not suggesting it's a small task, but there's a lot of development work in my mind that's required there. And the reason is because all of our cultures are different. All of our people that are a different place in their education, their capability and so forth. And it really is a matter of understanding each situation and coming up with the leadership and governance model that is going to help build confidence to the point where investment can be made. And that, I'm afraid, is missing in many places. In our companies, if you look at a very tiny example, a lot of us spent time being mentors to younger staff and so forth. And to me, a lot of, whilst we have the wonderful instruments like the IFIs, the World Bank and so forth, many wonderful organizations, we don't have the partnering and the mentoring going on that really assists countries on a continuing basis to develop these capabilities. And that to me is potentially something that is a responsibility of the developed countries, which they haven't really taken on at this point. And I do think it's an important one. We're not there yet.
Tony, thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring Karin in because I do believe you have a small operation outside North America. Was it India?
Yes.
In your passing, you see,
Yes.
I don't miss a trick. You know, I did pick that up. So you know, knowing fully that you had 30% of your people can work, you know, work from home, and suddenly you ramp up very quickly. Has it been the same thing in India, or was India ahead of the curve?
Yeah, India actually, we decided to not take any measures in India because they don't have as much support. We actually did have to temporarily lay off some staff in Canada and the US, not too many, but a few, because we just didn't have work for them. We did not touch India, knowing that they don't have sort of the more government support. But what we found in our office in India is that they've had COVID, they've had some sort of gas leak, they've had a weather, a storm, and so they were forced to work from home for multiple reasons. And so it's been a tough time for our India staff, but they have been working from home. What we've tried to do to go to this question, how do you support maybe some other countries that don't have as much? Our India staff are amazing, so well educated, do such a terrific job that we are trying to do more work, send more of the work there, even the North American work there, if we can. And but of course, knowing that as consulting engineers, we have to review appropriately, license, stamp things appropriately. So we have good processes to work together and do that. But our India office actually has fared quite well, and have not missed a beat.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Another point was raised earlier on by Karin. As usual, I'm picking you. Don't shoot me down on this. You talked about sustainability earlier on, and I know that you used that word in a very generic way. We know a lot of the point that Bill talked about in the earlier stage, talking about the sustainability millennium development goal, all these things coming into. The big word that is going around at the moment is about net zero. How do we design carbon out of our infrastructure solution? This is a big issue. And everybody talk about, the sustainability development goals. And now if you are going to invest in major infrastructure, people talk about the ESG, which is environmental sustainability, governance that you put into that. We are at the cutting edge of making a difference. The challenge we have as an industry, we always talk about, we need to design carbon out of it. Is this a golden opportunity for us to find a solution to decarbonize our society? I mean, I hear the word that less and less traveling should reduce the carbon emission. I'm not quite sure if you're an airline or whether you support that. How do we as an industry take a lead in that particular area on sustainability and take the ball, the real issue about net zero? How do we drive that forward?
And that's a big question, as usual, from your side, Nelson. I know you by now a little bit. So my tendency is to make it smaller than that. Okay. And I would like to come back to what I said earlier. I think this is the excellent chance to embrace the unknown, because nobody knows the answers. And making it smaller, for example, on infrastructure. The Dutch government has said they want to have all their new infrastructure and renovated infrastructure circular by 2030, which is only 10 years from now, and we don't know how to do that. So what should be, I think, what can be a good first step is to create a collaboration between scientists, public authorities, and consulting engineers and contractors, and make a short loop in picking a project, trying to use a new technique developed by the scientists in this project, and evaluate and validate whether it has worked or not, and then use the new knowledge to create new knowledge questions for the science, and creating new answers that can be used in practice. I think our role should be that the ones that transfer new knowledge to projects in the field, and making the loop as short as possible, and embrace the unknown time after time.
Yeah, thank you very much. It wasn't meant to be a big question. It's meant to be, I think you also gave me the answer, Karin. You really gave me the answer. You said start off with a little project and then build around. You talked about a small city with the challenges of COVID and see other things that comes out of that. So you gave me that answer. I'm really playing it back at you. One of the points that was also said earlier on, because I'm looking through the dashboard here, a lot of questions are coming through about good ideas. We're having this webinar. People are saying, yes, we talk about governance and leadership, but perhaps we need to talk about jurisdiction. But if I was Tony would probably say jurisdiction is part of the governance. I hear issues about how do you apply this in Sri Lanka. It may not be easy. I hear comment on the floor about people in Indonesia say these are great ideas. How do we bring it across that? All of these questions are flowing through. And I know that Andy and others are providing response as we go through. So thank you very much for trying to address some of those issues. But one point that I was going to bring back into goes back to Karin, which is the issue about funding and financing. We've had situations where we know for sure, taking Tony's point, that government are pumping money into the economy, into the public health, people well-being, the family and society, but we can't continue to print money. And this is an issue. We just cannot continue to print money. At the same time, there is money available. I know that the 3P was seen as a lifeline in Canada. It started actually in UK, and believe it or not, within a very short period, the UK, the Brits, they dumped it. They said, no, because the secondary market is not ideal for them. The Canadian embraced it and took it very well. And I hear that is happening around different parts of the world. Are we likely to learn lessons from the 3Ps in the past, so that in the new world that we are moving into, some of those messaging and messages on who carries the risk and that, do we have a responsibility as FIDIC, as an industry, to help to shed some light on how those risks can be mitigated so that the right people can carry the right risk? Catherine, your views?
I think FIDIC has a huge role to play in this. What we've seen in Canada really is a pendulum swing where the risk has been downloaded to the contractor, who then tries to download it to the consultant. And it's gotten really out of hand in Canada. You're right, the UK started P3, and as a firm, we actually had brought a consultant from the UK and spent a week educating our firm on how to do P3s. That was maybe 15 years ago. And we've done hundreds of P3 projects as a firm. I vet these projects very carefully to see how much risk they're trying to transfer, what the liquidated damages are, whether or not we can build it into our fee. We don't pursue certain projects. So I think FIDIC could help swing the pendulum back to get the risk transfer appropriately and to work more as part. P3 has the word partnership in it, but the partnership is often missing from the project. And I think the future of P3 is still very viable, necessary, as you say, Nelson. The governments don't have the money for everything that they need to do. But I'm thankful that in Canada, the governments and the infrastructure associations that look after these things are reaching out to our industry, asking us for how can things improve, and FIDIC can help in that way, and ACEC can help in that way.
Thank you very much, Kathleen.
I would be remiss if I didn't say that in Canada, we also care very much about sustainability, climate change, and it's top of mind, and a lot of funding is going into that as well. Our firm, we have an environmental section. We've been leaders in sustainability, and our staff and our population really care about this. And I don't think it's going to go away with COVID. COVID, we've actually seen the planet improve, with the greenhouse gas emissions being so reduced, that I hope that that's an example to us that we can do something. So I don't want to see that move aside, and I know that Canadians don't either, in our company especially.
Thank you very much.
Nelson,
I hope you don't mind me introducing that, but I did want to make sure that
Yeah, I was going to go through and ask for a sort of closing statement from each of the panelists, and I'm going to start off with one finish on Bill. So if I start in the reverse order, Tony,
Okay.
what's your closing statement? You know, we've discussed about the new norm and the challenges. What is your message to us, to FIDIC, and to the rest of the world?
Look, I think going to Karen's comment, reimagining the future, it just happens to be a byline of the company I work for. So, but it is, I think that's a really, really important thing to be thinking about now, and that includes contracts. And from FIDIC's perspective, you know, we've had alliances, we've had collaborative contracts, we've had PPPs, and we've seen what's happened under the PPP regime for one. I think we need to reimagine a lot of things and look forward to a different future with a different outlook. And if this pandemic has not brought the concept of risk front and center to a lot of people's mind, and you know, bring people to the realization we don't want to go there again, then I think, you know, we aren't learning. So I'd like to see us reimagine a different future, okay, and really get to work on it.
Thank you very much. Karin, your closing statement, please. What message you want to leave with us?
Yeah, I think what popped into my mind was, of course, this pandemic has brought huge problems in terms of health, the economy, job losses, etc. And I think what I would like to share with you is that we should use the bright things of this pandemic as a starting point for reimagining this future. And I think about the changed work-life balance as a plus from the pandemic. I think about blue skies and birds as a great plus. And I would say the collaboration is a great plus. And if we can use those as a starting point for this new future, I think, I would be positive.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Catherine, your closing statement, please. Thank you. Can you unmute?
As consulting engineers, we really are lucky that we are in a position to really help solve these world problems. And we have a responsibility to do so. And I think FIDIC is uniquely positioned to help us get together and leverage our worldwide knowledge. FIDIC is the one that can, you know, monitor what's going on, help us with the work, but most importantly, leverage the different member firms and member associations.
Thank you very much. Bill, your closing statement, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson, and thanks to all the speakers for just a terrific webinar. One of the themes that I believe came out of this particular webinar and came out of the previous ones as well to a degree is the opportunity and the need for organizations such as FIDIC and ACEC and the country organizations to communicate with decision makers. Is a great opportunity for us to share with decision makers our views on how to move forward and how to change things. Coming down to a lower level or into the weeds a little bit, as I tend to do when I hear about risk management and risk transfer, I think a lot of us get frustrated with what has been going on in our profession for quite some time. Well-minded people with the best interest of their clients in mind, in many instances have forced or tried very hard to transfer risk to entities that cannot control it, such as engineers and construction contractors. Very, very often, while the motives are good to do that, in the end, everyone loses. I think all of us have experienced projects where the balance of risk has been way out of whack, and as a result, the project has ended up being disappointing to everyone. I hope we can find ways to communicate that in a credible way, so that we're not perceived as just looking out for the interests of our profession, but really looking out for the success of projects. It's a real challenge, but I think there's an opportunity for us to address that. So back to you, Nelson.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. I just want to use this opportunity to probably wrap up, really. We started today to say, what does the new future look like? What is the new norm? We looked at, how does that impact our industry? And I think some of the comment I hear is that we've got to look at country, look at our industry, and then look at the wider sector. A lot of conversation talked about people's health and well-being, which is quite important, but at the same time, things will change for the future. But I hear a lot of issues about we should use this opportunity to address the fundamental issue about digital war, because we have to move into this digital age. Sustainability is a big issue and we need to address that. Nevertheless, diversity and inclusion continue to be on the agenda. What I also hear is we need to work in a very open-minded, in a collaborative manner, and reimagine the future and re-engineer the future. But we should not shy away from the opportunity of collaborating and working. I like the idea of using the artist as an example. How can we create new things by bringing ourselves together? Again and again, in all the conversation I hear about FIDIC and the local national association could be a platform for sharing new ideas and bringing new ideas together so that we can leverage that, whether it's at ACE or Netherlands, or whether it's ACEC or Consult Australia. We need to work together as an industry to bring the best together. I do hear a lot of takeaways, and I do know for sure that we've been spending some time to look at other issues, but just to try and summarize, we are looking at how do we re-engineer our industry? How do we embrace collaboration? How do we solve the world problem by looking at opportunities that the COVID-19 provide for us? How do we leverage on FIDIC and the FIDIC Association around the world to bring ideas and solutions together? And I take the precedent opportunity to say, this is an opportunity for us to communicate the solution in a very vibrant and positive way. We will be looking at this subject again tomorrow. Lesson learned from countries and government, how they're dealing with pandemic, and we'll be looking at it from all different parts of the world. So tomorrow we've got people coming up from North America, from Australasia, from Central Europe, from Africa and Middle East to help us to discuss what the government in each region are looking at. I want to use this opportunity to thank all participants in this particular program. We had nearly 650 people that registered, and I'm told that nearly 400 people, participated, which is substantive, quite a big percentage. I don't know how many countries, but we do get people from nearly 130 countries around the world supporting this webinar. So I want to thank everybody, wherever you are around the world, for participating. I want to thank all the speakers, particularly those who are new to the FIDIC war, and I'm really grateful to Karin's input, very much looking North America, but also give us an insight what's going on in India. Karin, very much, thank you very much for your suggestion and your 3 points and your takeaway. I'll look at that. Tony, thank you very much for your continued support as a Vice President. Give you that overall envelope looking at it. My other colleague behind the scene, Mr. Statistician, Graham, thank you very much for your support. I'm always excited by your data. And Andy, the need to communicate is ever so important. Never underestimate the need to communicate. So Andy, thank you very much for your support. And Mr. President, thank you very much for your time, once again, for supporting us. And to all the team of FIDIC behind the scene, Barbara, Nadia, all of them, I'm so grateful for all the effort to making this thing issue effortless for me, even though I'm not with you, but we are living in a digital world. On this note, thank you very much for participating. Wherever you are, keep safe. God bless. Thank you.